As with Mortal Kombat, the story of Injustice is told over multiple character-focused chapters, with a new character being given after the exact same number of fights every time, and that character never gets to be played as again. I'm not going to separate the mode from the story this time because pretty much every single criticism I had for the mode structure in MK 2011 still applies here, so I'm just going to leave a link here for a bit in case you haven't seen that or you just need a refresher. I will however still bring up every single fight to showcase that quite a lot of them are completely unnecessary. It's a bit less of a problem here since it helps establish the villains as dominant over the heroes who are constantly moving from place to place and still getting attacked. Well, in theory anyway, the villains still get their shit pushed in routinely, making it impossible to take them seriously. There is one notable addition to the formula here though. Occasionally the game will put the player into a short minigame before a match that can reduce one fighter's health based on the outcome. For example, Green Arrow firing at Solomon Grundy as he charges him. They're okay, but they feel a bit too gimmicky and make you wish they'd just done a simple QTE like in Soul Calibur 3. Luckily that is how this stuff is approached in MKX, so you don't need to bring it up in the comments, you smart-ass know-it-all fucks. Also, they did add the ability to replay any cutscene or fight you've passed before, and cutscenes can now be both paused and skipped, which are noteworthy improvements since you don't have to go through the entire thing every time now. It doesn't fix most of the problems, but back baby steps. So let's get into the story. I want you to pay attention and look out for the following occurrences. 1. Because handicap matches were removed, every time the player character faces multiple opponents, one will be knocked down or fight someone else until the first opponent is defeated, forcibly creating one-on-one scenarios regardless of how many characters are involved. 2. When the player character and their allies come upon two enemies, the player will fight the first one, then the second will defeat the player's ally, forcing the player to fight them too. 3. The cutscenes always have to be choreographed in such a way that the player character starts each fight on the left and the opponent on the right. 4. Everyone not being controlled by the player is utterly useless and loses feebly at every opportunity. 5. Most chapters will have the player fight two opponents in one arena, then move on to the next location for two more fights. This also had a tendency to happen in MK 2011, but I didn't pick up on it until writing this paragraph. I guess even if you spend 4 hours ranting about a game, you're going to miss something. And 6. I'd like you to observe how well the members of the Trinity perform in combat when not being played as. That's one that'll piss some fans off when they get it. You know, for how bad Street Fighter V's actual plot is, at least the structure of the mode doesn't have any of these issues. You have to love any story that opens on a quote from a fictional character. If they're real, it's just easy to be pretentious. If they're not real, it's just silly. The intro shows the reaction to the destruction of Metropolis at the GCPD, where we see a single shot of Jim Gordon who never appears beyond this point, making you wonder why they bothered making a character model for him. The Joker is being interrogated by Batman down the hall. If you notice the footage I'm showing being quite jittery, it's just the way the cutscenes look in the game, at least on PS4. I don't recall this being an issue on the 360, and trust me, if this was a thing back then, I'm the kind of person who'd remember that. Also, the cutscenes are notably darker than the in-engine stuff. Anyway, Superman smashes through the wall and looks ready to murder the Clown Prince of Crime. Even now when he's supposed to be a hero, this costume makes him look totally evil. It's here that we learn Joker set off a nuke in Metropolis after dosing Clark with Scarecrow's fear toxin, making him think he was fighting Doomsday when it was really Lois Lane, who was pregnant with his child. Yeah, this game is going to get dark. The game also routinely refers to the unborn child as a boy, but the comic suggests it was a girl. I don't know why that is. Needless to say, Lois is dead and Joker keeps taunting Clark until he puts his hand through Joker's chest, killing him. Quick question, why was the comic version of this scene way more explicit than the game made by the Mortal Kombat devs? Probably because they wanted to keep the game's age rating low to get more revenue, while the comics are made for 45-year-olds who crave senseless violence because it's the only way they can get a chubby. Following this, we jump to Elsewhere, i.e. the Prime Universe, to begin Chapter 1, Batman, because of course it's bloody Batman. He's on his way to Arkham Asylum to check on the Joker while the rest of the League deal with Lex Luthor's villain forces in both Metropolis and the Watchtower. I'm not quite sure how Lex contacted and recruited Sinestro, Ares and Doomsday to his side, nor how Doomsday gets his shit pushed in so hard. Again, they don't get the characters. Bruce is ambushed by Deathstroke, whom he dispatches handily, but this fight showcases a really odd detail with these stages. Almost every stage in the game has other heroes and villains cameoing around the arena. This is cool in arcade mode and versus mode, but in the story, it seems really out of place for Hugo Strange to stand there watching Batman and Deathstroke duke it out from like 2 feet away, or for Martian Manhunter to float around the watchtower not helping, then disappearing during cutscenes. It's not difficult to simply turn those cameos off for specific modes. They turned off the cameos when those characters were active in MK 2011, so why not here? Anyway, Batman teleports to the Watchtower and defeats both Bane and Lex because God forbid anyone but Batman be able to defeat a villain one-on-one. The Lex fight is preceded by the first of those awful minigames which sees Lex teleport backwards in between each segment to facilitate his continual moving forward in spite of there not being enough space for that. It's almost like this was a stupid idea. Joker and his nuke are detected in Metropolis, so the senior leaguers rush off to stop him, and if you're paying close attention, one major difference between the two universes is presented here. In the Regime universe, it was never suggested that the Joker was working with Lex and the other villains. In fact, given that we later learn that Regime Lex was never a villain at all, it seems Joker was working solo in that universe. He also survived the destruction of Metropolis, suggesting he was nowhere near it like his Prime counterpart was, and Fear Toxin is never brought up in the Prime version of the plan. I don't know, I just find it weird that the version where Joker didn't have the backing of half a dozen other villains was more successful. The story feels like it's supposed to be about two identical universes that diverge when one Superman has his one bad day, as the Joker would put it, and the other does not. However, the numerous other differences between the two realities don't mesh with that concept. Joker tries to trigger the nuke just as the other heroes arrive. A few of them are surrounded by strange energy, and Bruce and Joker suddenly find themselves in an altered version of Metropolis. Exactly how Batman can recognize it after it was reduced to rubble, rebuilt and redecorated, I don't know, but he beats Joker and a military force arrives to take them in. It's clear they're pursuing Batman as well as the Joker, so Bruce uses some gadgets to escape and the Joker gets away in the confusion. We then transition into Chapter 2, Green Lantern, as he, Wonder Woman, Green Arrow and Aquaman have found themselves in an equally occupied Gotham. Hal leaves to recharge his ring at Ferris Airfield while Arthur heads for Atlantis and the other two investigate Gotham. Hal arrives to find Deathstroke being tortured by Cyborg and Raven, who mention that most of the other Titans died in Metropolis. As I said earlier, there are no handicap matches this time around, so Cyborg gets knocked on his ass to facilitate a one-on-one with Raven, and then with him. After the two Titans are dealt with, Hal releases Slade, who does a Batman while Hal receives a call from Diana. He returns to Gotham where Sinestro is attacking her and Ollie. Hal arrives and Sinestro alludes to Regime Green Arrow's death. It's mentioned that the Sinestro Corps is working with the so-called One Earth government, but only 2 members actually appear during the game's events. Once Sinestro goes down, the other Yellow Lantern arrives. Hal Jordan. Regime Hal has concluded that fear is more powerful than willpower, which is a pretty cool way of distinguishing the two. And the game does have a green version of this costume that's available for use, even if there is no Green Lantern Sinestro costume. How? How do you miss one of the most obvious options for an alternate costume in the fucking game? But with the Yellows defeated, the 3 heroes retreat to evade the government forces, where they run into a Batman. Back in the Prime universe, Superman, Flash and Cyborg are working on a way to get their friends back, and enjoy it while you can because these little bits are among the only times we get to see Superman or Cyborg that feel like the actual characters, and not some twisted Zack Snyder monstrosity. So Chapter 3 finds Aquaman arriving in Atlantis and getting caught up on the events of the past 5 years. We learn that Superman began a campaign against supervillains and took over the planet with the help of the superheroes who joined him. And we meet 2 of them now in the form of the Flash and Shazam, who arrive as Superman's envoys in negotiating for the integration of Atlantis into Superman's forces. The 2 attack and Shazam is knocked out, leaving Flash to fight Aquaman until Billy wakes up. Arthur defeats Flash, then Shazam. Hey DC, this Aquaman is a total badass and could easily turn people around on the character without turning him into Khal Drogo. You fucking idiots. The Regime version of Aquaman then arrives for a mirror match. After getting lectured on handing his army over to Superman's command, Regime Aquaman is defeated. It ain't my Atlantis. He and his guards are then frozen by Ares as he arrives, thrilled that the conflict has begun again in earnest. Even though Ares is there to assist Prime Arthur, the 2 fight anyway to fill the quota, with ego being the limp justification. And I hope you enjoyed having 4 fights in a row in Atlantis, because we never come back here for the rest of the story. I mean, that probably is the reason why it's 4 fights in a row, but still, come on. Ares explains that he's weak from Superman's near total elimination of conflict. Batman is the only hero still opposing Superman, as the rest are either dead or turned, and the villains are somewhat split between the two sides, as we see next chapter. So yeah, Superman leads the villains, Batman leads the heroes. Look, can we just stop with the whole Batman versus Superman thing? The bit's done. How many times are we going to see this matchup played out the same fucking way every time? It's always Batman is the good guy and Superman is the bad guy. Like, I get it. The David and Goliath concept, the mortal man versus the godlike being. We all love a good underdog story, so I get why the concept appeals to people, but it's always the same thing. Batman is always prepared and sets traps that let him win. This always just assumes Superman is a colossal retard who can't predict that Batman will be prepared and make his own preparations. And surely if Batman is always so prepared he can topple the Man of Steel with little trouble, doesn't that make Superman the underdog? Shouldn't we then be rooting for him rather than the Murray Sue ultimate smart guy Batman? At least then we'd have a protagonist we can actually like. At the very least, couldn't we have had Batman as the villain? The whole thing is set into motion by his villain. He's the one that's always riding the line, and his preparedness could justify him capturing the rest of the league's big hitters before anyone knows what's happening and keeping them imprisoned until they see things his way. Because if Superman genuinely thought he was right, he would do just that. He'd capture his former allies and try to make them see things his way. They're friends after all, and rational people don't try to burn their friends to death over disagreements. Funnily enough, it's Batman v Superman that has the best excuse for the fight between these two, because those versions don't know each other at the time. Similar stories like Civil War, Avengers vs X-Men, Civil War 2, Trinity War, they all suffer the same problem. These characters are rational adults and they have been friends for over a decade. They would not resort to violence anywhere near that quickly, but at the very least the heroes don't intentionally murder one another, usually. The problem with this whole plot really is that Superman wouldn't go down this road. Again, Batman rides the line a lot more, so he'd make more sense than the Big Blue Boy Scouts. Now, I feel that some of the heroes who join Superman could maybe be justified in their reasoning. Hal Jordan, being a military man, could be one of the ones who would be more pragmatic and see killing villains as being the better option, especially when it's just a normal human who destroyed Metropolis. And am I the only one who finds it weird that Billy Batson, the youngest of the League, actually a child/teen who sees the world in the most black and white terms, changes the white in his costume to black when he joins Superman, despite genuinely trusting in Superman's actions as being for the best? He's basically intentionally altered his costume to make himself look more like a bad guy. Ares sends Aquaman to Batman's base where the other three are waiting. We're introduced to a strength-enhancing pill used by Superman's forces to augment their abilities. This is the story's justification for how someone like Bruce or Ollie could go toe-to-toe with Superman, Black Adam or Doomsday. It's basically the equivalent of the power fluctuation plot device from MK vs DCU, only I have a slightly harder time believing this one. Batman enters with Lex Luthor, and as I mentioned before, this Lex was never evil, which doesn't really impact the story at all. I can only assume that the writers felt that Regime Superman would never let Lex live even if he promised to turn over a new leaf, so they removed his villainous past. So instead of realising that this Superman isn't Superman and changing him back, they changed Lex fundamentally too to facilitate it. Anyway, Lex is Superman's ally but secretly leaks information to Batman and funds his insurgency. He and Bruce are the ones who brought the Prime heroes over to the Regime universe because they need these four to access a weapon in the Batcave. The logic is a bit messy here. We can assume that before everything went down, Bruce had his usual fail-safes in place for the other members of the League, and this weapon was the one he had in mind for Superman. Okay, holds up so far. He then decided to set the lock to require a certain 4 other Leaguers he trusted, possibly so he couldn't use it against Superman if it was he who went bad. Okay, still holds up. But Regime Aquaman's bio makes it clear he's only recently made contact with the surface, meaning he was never a member of the League, so why is his DNA needed? It's clearly not just any 4 members, since Bruce and Lex say they've been monitoring these 4 specifically. And this can't be something Superman set up afterwards to prevent the weapon from being used because A, he doesn't know about the weapon, and B, Aquaman is just now joining up with Superman. None of this makes any sense. The game also never makes it clear if the Prime heroes travelled through time as well, or if the Regime universe is just 5 years ahead naturally. And the setup isn't the present and a bad future they need to prevent, so we can rule that idea out as well, even if that might have made the story work a little better. Over in the Fortress of Solitude, Superman has a device attached to Doomsday to control him. Suppression of free will, yep, another atrocity Superman has committed. Now you may argue that Doomsday is a mindless beast anyway, or that he's too powerful so it's for the greater good somehow. Well, to that I say, Hawkgirl's ending and Regime Bio reveal that she was brainwashed into Superman's service, though it's not specified how. Your argument is now null and void. Wonder Woman arrives in a pretty slutty dress which they may as well have made selectable seeing how they made the model. We learn that she and Clark are now an item, which is another oddity. A major part of Superman's motivation is based around his guilt over what he did to Lois, and here he is fucking another woman. He would absolutely close himself off and vow never to love again for fear of the same thing happening in the future. And of course, the Spirit of Truth, the champion of the Amazons, the single most loving person in the DCU, is totally on board with oppression, murder, and mind control. Hal then arrives to report the encounter with the Prime heroes. Superman is weirdly nonplussed to hear that Green Arrow is running around again with a doppelganger of Wonder Woman. For some reason, it's the doppelganger of Hal that gets a response from Superman. This guy's being written like he's a fucking alien. Oh wait.